Hey, what's up, guys? Man, we're so excited that you guys are tuning in today. As you can see, we are in the vision room. I am back to sitting down because I'm tired of standing up. Not really, just figured I'd do something different. Hey, a couple announcements before we hop in. Number one, Drive-In Church is this Sunday at 10 a.m., and that is going to be the new norm for us. So plan on Drive-In Church turning into lawn service church, being at 10 a.m. on Sundays, starting this Sunday. Which also leads me into my next announcement, which is next week, we will not be having a student lesson. Treat next week as a family Sunday. Reason for that is I'm actually going to be teaching the lesson or sermon, whatever you want to call it, in adult church. So you guys can tune into that with your parents, or come to it with your parents. So be on the lookout for that. Another thing is be on the lookout for small groups. If your small group leader, if you haven't been in touch with them or haven't been talking to them, make sure you reach out and get in contact with them so that you can stay plugged into your small group. And lastly, this is our last week of the U Effect. So this is going to be week 3 of it. So let's go ahead and hop back in. I'm sure that you guys have probably heard this of the saying cause and effect. It basically means that you do something, something else happens because of that something. So for example, cause, your mom is in a good mood today, so the effect is you're gonna ask her for some cash to buy a new video game. Or cause, your teacher gives you a pop quiz, so the effect is your day is ruined. Or cause, you look like a mess today because you slept in and didn't have time to get up and do your makeup, so you're not gonna wanna, the effect is you're not gonna wanna see your crush whenever you're walking around. You get the idea. The funny thing though is that we love to be the cause when something is going right. If something good happens, we're okay with knowing that we are the cause for that thing to happen. But when something bad happens, we're not running over there to take the responsibility for that bad thing. Like when I lose my keys, I don't immediately sit there and think about where I might have put my keys. 99% of the time, I will ask Elke where she took my keys to. I will immediately pass blame on her and ask her what she did with my keys when it is 100% my fault that I didn't put them in the bowl by our door. And you know the bowl I'm talking about, right? The one that's by every front door of every house where people just throw all their junk that's in their pockets. We have one too. I'm supposed to put my keys in there, but I don't sometimes, so I immediately go and blame her for it and ask her where she moved them to, when in reality, it's my fault. But here's the thing. In life, we are going to make mistakes and we're going to mess up. And if that mistake is big enough or that mess up is big enough, we could lose that positive influence that we've been talking about for the past 2 weeks. Here's what I mean. Let's say that you have a good relationship with your friends and you're a natural leader in that friend group and whatnot. But then let's say that you get caught gossiping about those friends or talking bad about them or doing things that maybe they're not super into and they know that you shouldn't be doing. You could very easily lose that influence that you have over those friends. And sometimes this happens in a big way. We did something bad and it comes to bite us in the butt. Maybe you gossiped about someone like I just said, or maybe you sent a text you shouldn't have sent, or you looked at something you shouldn't have looked at, or you were somewhere that you shouldn't have been at a certain time. We all know what I'm talking about, and those things could lead to losing that influence and losing that effect. And then before you know it, people that constantly looked up to you, they're not so much looking up to you anymore, and adults that respected you maybe give you that disappointed look, and then friends that were always so quick to want to hang out with you suddenly are busy. And then sometimes it happens in a small way. You make a little comment or action along the way, and before you know it, those little things stack up and they snowball, and you're back to that part where you have lost the respect from people or you have lost the ability to influence those people and they end up turning away. How we treat others will impact the effect that we have on their lives, plain and simple. And over time, those interactions that are bad could lead to people no longer listening to us and the effect that we have on them. So we lose the ability to affect them positively. After a while, you may start to wonder if you're ever going to be able to get that relationship back to normal. Are you going to be able to be that positive effect on people's life again once you lose it? And this will happen to all of us because the fact is none of us are perfect. We're all going to fail at some point. We make decisions that create distance between us and other people, and we get it in our head that there's no coming back from this. We decided to skip church one week, or we skipped on a small group meeting, or we ghosted our buddy's text one too many times, and 1 week turns into 2 weeks and then 3 weeks, and before you know it, you feel so separated from that person or so separated from the group, and you wonder, can I get back to that? And maybe you used to be a positive effect type of person to those around you, but you feel like that's not the case anymore. So if that's you, let me reassure you of one thing. You are certainly not alone in this. The Bible is full of people that were positive influences and then lost that influence due to something that they did, but then they end up gaining it back. And they thought that their story was over, but we're actually going to look at a particular story where we find out that that's not the case. We're going to be looking at a lady from the Bible who thought she had hit rock bottom and she had no influence, and then regain that back. But before that, let's remember some context here. You guys know, if you guys know me, I love talking about context. So the context of the story is this. This, first of all, is a woman. And back in this time, in Jesus' time, women they didn't have any influence. Women were looked at as possessions, and women were looked at as disposable, and they weren't a very big contributing member of society. Now, obviously, I don't agree with that, but that's just the fact of the matter of where this story took place. They already had a low influence, and they were seen as lesser than men, and so they are already at a disadvantage. This lady already is. And this particular lady had made some extra questionable decisions, so she is, her influence is plummeting to the floor, if you want to look at it that way. She has no influence left. And her encounter with Jesus is recorded by Luke. So if we look at Luke chapter 7, verse 36, it says this. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. So remember here who the Pharisees are. These people are religious leaders that pride themselves in knowing so much about the Jewish religion and about the scriptures, so much so that they believe they have the most influence out of anybody, and that led them to look down on anybody that had less influence than them. So if you were lesser than them in their eyes, you were worth nothing. So let's keep reading what happens. We'll be in chapter 7, verse 37 to 38. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. So this probably sounds weird to you guys, but remember, context. Back in this day, people didn't have cars, and you really didn't have a horse or anything to ride on unless you were really rich. So most of the time, people walked everywhere. And people didn't wear shoes, they wore sandals. So think about how nasty your feet would get, right? You're walking through streets that are made of dirt, and you're in your sandals, and you're stepping in mud, and you're stepping in poop from animals that have been trotting through them. Like, we're talking nasty, nasty feet. So it was a very well-known custom to, when you went into somebody's house, they would bring out some water and they would wash your feet when you went into their house. It was just part of being of doing hospitality, which is crazy when you think about it. That the woman came into this Pharisee's house and she used her tears to wash Jesus' feet, and then instead of grabbing a towel or something else to dry him, she actually ends up using her hair. Not only that, but she also pours perfume all over it. But what I want us to focus on is the fact that what she did was more about worship than it was about washing feet. Let me repeat that. Her act of doing this to Jesus' feet was all about worshiping him. It wasn't about the act of cleaning feet. It was more about the worshiping of Jesus. And the Pharisees had something to say about this. So in the next verse it says, when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner. He imagined that Jesus would walk away and would push her away and not want to be touched by her, but he was completely wrong. Jesus ran towards these kind of people, the people that were attracted to him, the sinful people. He actually preferred it that way. People with no influence came to Jesus. Sinners were drawn to Jesus. People that had negatively affected others were drawn to Jesus. The woman knew that she had no influence. She knew that her reputation with this particular group of people was rock bottom. It was terrible. And this drives her straight to Jesus' feet. I want you to catch this. Her appreciation for Jesus was fueled by her own inadequacy. She wasn't hiding from Jesus because she wasn't adequate. Instead, she let this feeling carry her to worship Jesus. Now, let's keep reading. Verse 41, it says, "Then he turned towards the woman and said to Simon," Simon being the Pharisee, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman from the time I entered has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, and her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little." Then Jesus said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." Simon probably looked at this woman and saw her as nothing, but Jesus looked at her and he saw something completely different in her. He saw potential and purpose in somebody that could affect people later down the road. Up until this point, the cause and effect of this lady's life went something like this. Cause, she was a sinner. Effect, people looked down on her and thought negatively about her. But after her encounter with Jesus, those flipped a little bit. Now they look like cause, Jesus loves her. Effect, Jesus forgave her and gave her a new start. Guys, no matter what you've done or how bad of a person you feel like you are or how people view you, the fact is that you and me and everybody else is crazy loved by Jesus. And you are free to love him back. You don't need to get it together or make sure you're all good to go before you encounter Jesus. And the coolest part of the story is that this lady had a lot more influence after encountering Jesus than she could have ever imagined. Think about it. Her story has been told thousands of years later, and she's highlighted as a pillar of faith in the scriptures. And her effect, if you will, might have almost been gone, but through Jesus, it became bigger than ever imagined. She chose to step towards Jesus, and that redeemed her story. She had lost her influence, her status, and standing, but these things weren't lost forever. Because Jesus, we can change the effect that we have on others. So just like the lady in the story, our mistakes don't have they don't have to erase our potential to have a positive effect. Jesus is all about new starts. That's his bread and butter. That's what he's all about. So maybe you feel like you relate to this story because you personally have made some questionable decisions and you feel like those bad decisions have disqualified you from having an effect on anybody and that you're somebody that God isn't going to use. Well, God forgives and he is quick to do it and he is quick to use those that allow him to do so. So then the next question that we may ask ourselves is like, well, God is quick to forgive, but will people move on or have I lost their ear? Can we change that? Well, here's a few steps that I want to give you to head into that right direction. Number one, you need to reflect. Ask yourself that honest question and be honest with yourself. What steps or decisions have you taken that have led you into this place where your effect has been dismissed or when people aren't listening to you anymore? Is it how you speak to people? Are you too harsh or sarcastic? Are you doing things that you shouldn't be doing when nobody's around? Are you lying to those closest to you? Whatever it is, you need to find, the first step is to find that thing and pinpoint it. The second thing is you got to confess. Sit down and have a conversation with God. He wants to hear you out. He wants to listen to you, and he is quick to forgive and quick to move on. And even after that, you may even want to reach out to one of your leaders or an adult or to me or somebody in your life that can hold you accountable. Remember what I always say? I always say life was made to be lived in community. Life was made to be lived with those around us, and that expands to our mentors and people that are older than us in our lives because we need those people to keep us accountable. And the third thing is you need to identify a specific step to move in the right direction and rebuild that trust that might have been broken. And this step could look like apologizing to somebody or changing the way you talk to people or asking someone to check in on you periodically. Maybe they know that you maybe don't make the wisest choices whenever your parents are out of town. So maybe letting somebody know that they're leaving and that you would like for them to check in on you this weekend while they're gone. Being smart enough to not put yourself in those situations where you could potentially fail and doing it alone You need to be smart enough to set those parameters and safety nets around you during those times. As we wrap up today, I want you to remember that your lost influence isn't completely lost. You have the ability to work that back. Because of Jesus, we can change the effect we have in others. Lost influence doesn't have to be lost forever. And you do have the ability to step into the right direction. We're all going to screw up. We're all going to at some point take our you effect, if you will, from good to bad. And when this happens, it can be so easy for us to just call it quits and realize that we're never going to get it back and just give up on it. But if we've learned anything, is that Jesus makes it clear that nobody's story is over until he says so. So through Jesus, you can always bring that you effect from bad back to good. When we draw closer to him, he invites us to stand up instead of giving up. And he helps us get that effect back to positive, one move at a time. We love you guys. Can't wait to see you next week. We miss you. I hope you're doing okay. If you need anything, let us know. See ya.